Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I am working on one of my own old projects. This is a quilt top that I had made back in the early 1990s. I made it for my son. It's a Tessellating Star, and I was in kind of a hurry to make this. So once I got all the blocks put together, I tied it, and I've only tied 2 blocks in my entire life, and I regretted each one, especially on a child's quilt, because this one was well used, well loved, laundered several times, and when I took it apart, the ties have left holes in the quilt top. So right now what I'm doing is I am looking it over and trying to decide if I really want to deconstruct this quilt and put new pieces of fabric in it, or if I just want to recreate it. At the moment, you know, it's all taken apart. There's no backing or batting on it anymore, and I went ahead and I bought some new batting and backing. But the more I look at this quilt top, the more damage I see, and I am not certain I want to go to all of the work of deconstructing it and then putting it back together. So I'm kind of looking it over and trying to decide what to do. A lot of the black squares, like here, have holes in it from the ties, and so I'm going around and I'm counting how many of these I need to replace. And actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and remove at least the worst ones and replace them and see what it looks like, because you know, this has been laundered several times and the fabric is no longer the original color. So and I don't have any original fabric anymore, so anything I put in here is going to look pretty obvious. It's going to look off. But you know, this is a kid's quilt. Of course, my son's no longer 5 years old. He's 30. So I don't know. I hate throwing out a quilt. I wouldn't throw it out. Even if I decide not to repair this, I would keep it the way it is. But anyway, I'm going to start deconstructing this. This is the binding that was on there. I took it off of the batting, but it's still attached to the front. So I'm working on taking all of that off, and then I'll go from there. So I don't know if you ever have had, this is where it was at. Here's where I was at. See this strip here, this is the old binding. I can't reuse this, it's too worn. I might as well just replace this. And so I'm going to go ahead and take this apart, take off the binding, and then decide from there what I need to do for this quilt. And I want to show you a little bit of a close-up, so I'm going to adjust the camera and lay out the quilt so that you can see what the block looks like in this top. Okay, I think you can see this red star here. This is a Tessellating Star, but the block is right here. This is the block. So you have these triangles surrounding a square, and it's set on, well, it's not set on point, it's set wonky. So I can't remember where I got this pattern. I know I didn't make it up, but I got it somewhere. I've got a couple of books. I probably got it from there. Since I did make this in probably the mid to late 1990s, and you know, there wasn't the internet, or if there was the internet, there was not YouTube. So there wasn't that access. I didn't have that there. So anyway, here's the star points, and you can see they encompass 4 different blocks. So you really had to plan out this pattern. And you can see I used all, or mostly, children's prints. Here's, I remember this, the Rainbow Zoo. I remember his room being that theme when he was real little, when he was a toddler. And then Okay, these greens and purples, those were some that I had in my stash, but here's some more kids prints. There's dinosaurs, more Rainbow Zoo. Then we had some bright polka dots, and we had some rainbow fish, and this was a leopard. Here's the leopard's face, and there's some of the print. So there's a lot of fabrics in here that I don't know that he would remember, but they're all related to things that I made for him. So it's got a lot of memories in it, so I don't want to throw it away. So anyway, I got some decisions to make. Okay, I went through my stash again, and I did find some black fabric that I think matches pretty well, and I'm going to go ahead and use this. I've cut some pieces that are 4 inches square, which is the size of these squares here. Now most of this quilt was tacked in the black squares, so those are the pieces that need to be replaced. Now the easiest way to get them in would be to pull this whole block out and completely deconstruct it, and then completely reconstruct it again. Anyway, I'm going to start with this piece here. I'm going to take this one out and see how it goes putting this new piece in. So I got the binding pieces off. I may have to trim this down because this is in kind of in sad shape. It's kind of ragged. So I'm going to let it go for now. I'm not going to worry about it at this point. I want to do all the replacing of all the pieces that I need to first. So I'm going to see what I can do with this. So first thing I have to do is to rip this piece out, and then figure out how it's going to be the easiest way to get this new piece in. Another thing I could do is to applique this on, which would be, you know, turning under all of my seams and just laying it on top, and then either machine or hand appliquing that down, which I may do, but first I want to try and see if I can just stitch this in. And if that is too much of a hassle, then I'll see about doing the applique. So first things first, I have to rip this square out. Okay, I stitched this piece in, and it really wasn't that bad. So I think this is going to work pretty well. So I just need to get back to cutting out some of the pieces and or ripping them out. I think I'll go ahead and work on this one next. This one here. This one. And I'll show you how I'm putting that back in the quilt. Okay, I spent several hours yesterday evening and about 2 hours this evening taking out the rest of these blocks that I want to replace. I wanted to show you kind of what I have. and it's kind of a mess. You see all the holes? They're just everywhere. There's just more and more holes. And I originally wasn't going to take this many out at a time because I was afraid it would compromise the integrity of the quilt. But then I realized, you know, I'm the one who put this quilt top together. I know my quality of work, and it's not going to fall apart, and it's holding up really well. So you can see, like on some of these stars, there's several holes around them that are going to have to be replaced. So it just makes more sense to me, rather than doing some ripping out and then piecing in, and then ripping out and piecing in. If I could just do all the ripping out at once, and then I could sit down and do all the piecing, and I think it'll go a little bit quicker. So got a lot of work ahead of me. I do have some of the squares cut, but I need to cut some more because I had to replace almost every single black square in here. Now there is this row down here on this edge that held up really well, and I'm not going to replace those down on this edge here. So those are all Actually, this one I did replace, but the others are not going to be replaced. So doing pretty good there. But I think this will look really good once I get it done, and the color of this fabric, it's still fresher, a little brighter. You can call it black bright, but it's obviously a newer fabric than what's in here, but it's the closest I could find, so I'm going to go for it. And then I am going to go ahead and I'm going to trim this border down. I don't have enough fabric to put a new border on. I'm just going to trim it down because the edges are really frayed. You can see that. See how frayed those are? Those are pretty frayed. So I'm going to trim those instead of replacing them. I'm just going to trim them down. And I may, you keep thinking maybe I'll add an extra border on here. I don't know yet. I haven't quite decided. But anyway, next step, replacing all of these squares, filling all these holes that I made. So there we go. Lots of work to do. Okay, I'm going to work on this piece here. I have to replace a square here, and I'm just going to pick a triangle to start with, and I'm just going to start with this one. So I'm going to put right sides together with the square, and I'm going to put in a couple pins, and what I'm working on is the wider edge of the triangle, so it's the one with the right angle on it. And I'm going to pin this here, and then on this one, this is the first line of sewing, and I'm just going to go halfway down this one because I need the bottom of this free. I don't want this attached at the moment because there's going to be a lot of manipulating of the fabric here. So I'm going to sew this one from the triangle side, and just use my normal 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and then I'm just going about halfway down, and then I'm going to stop. I'm not going to back stitch, just going to stop here and then trim threads. Okay, so I have this. Now what I want to do is to sew this seam here. So this is going to go over like this. So let me flip this around to this side. Now I'm going to work from the back of the quilt. So I'm going to start here at the bottom, and I'm going to match up the right angles. And so I need a little space here. And if I don't feel like I have enough, I'm going to trim a couple threads and pull that back a little bit more. And so I have these matched up. I'll go ahead and put in a pin and then start up here, and I'm just going to make sure I have everything lying flat. And it helps if I press this ahead of time before I started, but I didn't. So I didn't press those seams after I took the stitching out, but it would have helped if I had. So I'm going to put in a couple pins. So now I'm going to start up here where the stitching ends and just sew all the way down to the bottom. And I want to make sure my seam doesn't turn on me, so tuck that in. There we go. Yeah, it's wanting to turn, so let me manipulate it a little bit more. There we go. Just to pull pins as I go. see how that went. Cut my threads. Okay. So what happened here is I did get a pucker up here, so I'm going to have to fix that. But I'll just go ahead and take that out. Since I didn't backstitch, that'll come out real easy. Or at least it should. This is one of those times when pressing is your friend. So let me try that again. Okay, I think that took care of it. There we go. Okay, so now we've got that one seam. So I'm going to do the same thing, and now we're just going to keep going around it. And now since I'm on the back of the quilt, I can work clockwise on this. If I was trying to work on the front of the quilt, I would be going counterclockwise. So just put in as many pins as I feel I need. And then I'll stitch down this seam. So if you have a different type of patchwork, you'd have different types of seams, but since this was put in with a partial seam to begin with, and you just go clockwise, it's really not that difficult. Now if I was trying to replace the triangles, that would be quite a bit more difficult, but fortunately when I tied this quilt, I did tie it in the black squares and not in the stars, and otherwise I'd have had a bigger mess than what I have right now. So each quilt is going to be different, and you just have to kind of work with what you've got and decide if it's worth redoing again, or if you just need to recreate the quilt or just let it go. And I'm not doing this, my son hasn't asked for this quilt. I don't even know if he remembers it. It was just one that was in my stash, and it kind of was the next one in line to be worked on, because I did intend on machine quilting this quilt at some point, because I had already gone ahead and taken out the ties, and I took off the batting, and you know, it was ready to be requilted. It was just not in good enough shape to quilt. So here we go. We've got half seam, one full seam, and another full seam, and then we're going to just go to the next triangle and sew this one in too. And then anytime I get with someplace with stray threads, just clip them out of the way. There's no sense in messing with them. So it's not really hard to do. It's a little difficult to manipulate all this fabric, but it's not a difficult project, really. It's not really complicated. It's just manipulating all this fabric is probably the hardest part of it. And I think I said in the beginning that, you know, one thing to do, the easiest thing to do would be to take the whole block out and just work on it one block at a time. But that's a lot of extra work to do, and I just didn't want to go to that extent. So this may be a little bit, just a little bit more complicated because of not taking them apart. I mean, it's just a little more difficult to work with it as a whole quilt than as individual blocks. But this should save time in the long run. So, and time is valuable. So, okay. Now I have 3 full seams and a half, and I just have to finish this half seam. So just turn it how I need to get to that seam. And then I just need to stitch this one closed. And I don't think I need any pins. It's not very long of a seam here. I'm going to go ahead and back stitch right there. Okay, so that one is now all stitched in, and here's what it looks like from the front. There we go. So that looks pretty good. So I have about, I think I had 17 or 18 squares to replace this time around. I have already replaced at least that many, if not more. So I've got quite a bit of work to do. Once that's all done, then I will trim the border, and it'll be ready to quilt. Okay, I have all the squares replaced, and this is what it's looking like. And I think it looks really good. As far as the border is concerned, I went ahead and laid it across my long arm machine and started measuring it out, and I realized that measuring through the center of the quilt was 2 inches smaller than the edges of the quilt, and that is because all of these are on bias edges, so they're stretchy, and just over time with this quilt being in use, these have stretched. So and also the border, I think I cut the border lengthwise instead of crosswise on the grain. So I went ahead and I did find the backing to this quilt. I couldn't find it when I was cutting out the squares, but there was enough good fabric in that backing that I was able to cut out strips for the border. So I'm going to attach those, and then the quilt will be ready to quilt. And I have to come up with a design idea. So I have a couple of things in mind. I'm probably going to give this back to my son if he wants it, and so I don't want anything too feminine. And it's obviously a kid's quilt. I don't know if he'll want it or not, because of the reason that it is a kid's quilt. And I have made other quilts for him since this one, of course, and so he may not want it, but I want to keep it as kind of a kid's quilt. So I don't want anything feminine since it was made for a boy. So I may just do a lot of straight line quilting in this. But my next thing to do is to attach the borders, and I have strips cut. I need to measure those strips and cut them to length, and then attach them, and then I'll be ready to quilt. So I'm getting there, and I am happy with the way this top looks with the new squares in it. There is a difference in the fabric. It's not the same fabric, and like this is an older piece and this is a new one, and when you're up close you can see that this is new and this one is old, but it's not a real striking change. So you know, this is just to show, well, it's just for me to preserve this quilt, but it's also to show you that there are things you can do to old quilts if they're not in good enough shape to use the way they are. You don't have to throw them out, or you don't have to cut them up. You can replace pieces in them and freshen them up and requilt them and make them new. Of course, a lot is going to depend on how much quilting is in there to begin with, if there's any quilting at all. But if there's a lot of quilting, you may not want to do what I did and take the whole quilt apart, because this one was tied, so that wasn't difficult. All I had to do was snip the ties and pull them out. But if I had a top that was heavily quilted and the fabric's disintegrating and I want to replace it, you know, I would have to think about the time that it's going to be involved and whether I want to put that amount of time into it, and if the quilt is going to be worth that, or if it's so far gone that, you know, you'll be replacing every piece, you might as well just recreate it from the beginning. So anyway, those are all things you can think about if you've got an old top that you want to recreate or reconstruct. Just look at it and see how much work it is. And I'll tell you, I've put in 12 to 16 hours in this quilt already, and I don't have the borders on it yet, and I haven't started the quilting. So, but you know, this quilt was kind of special to me because I made this for my son when he was little. So, and I don't remember exactly. I've got the records upstairs in my computer, but I think this is about 25 years old. So, I wanted to preserve it because of that, because it was made especially for him, and you know, he may want it one day. I don't know. But anyway, that's why I'm doing this one. Now, if it was one that I picked up at a flea market, and it was really far gone, for one thing, I wouldn't buy it in the first place. But sometimes you buy quilt tops, and from what you can see in the store, they don't look like they're in that bad of shape. But once you get them home and you look at them really closely, you may see a lot of damage that you didn't notice to begin with. You know, and part of that is the lighting in the store, how hurried you are to make a decision, and how excited you are. You know, if you find a quilt top that you've been looking for a long time, you finally find it, or it's a pattern that you haven't seen before, and it's one of those where your heart is leading the way instead of your head, and you go and you buy it, and then you bring it home and you realize, like, oh, this is not one I can throw on the machine right away and quilt. I'm going to have to do some work to it before it's ready for that. So those happen. And you know, just, you know, look at it and decide, is it worth your time and effort to make the repairs, or is it one that you need to just kind of set aside and let it go the way it is? So anyway, just a couple of tips. So I'm going to get ready, and I'm going to put the borders on this. And anyway, I'm not going to have this quilted for this video. I don't have enough time. That'll come next week, and so I'll hopefully have this all completed, and I'll have some nice video of all the quilting and the finished product, and I hope you enjoy that. But I hope this video has given you some ideas on things that you can do to conserve or to save an old quilt top that needs a little more help other than just quilting it. Whether you need to remove large amounts of it or to replace the fabrics, or if there's just some repairs that you can do, and different ways to do it. With this one, I was able to piece the sections in that I needed to replace. Other ones you may, you know, have to applique on top. There's lots of options on things you can do to preserve a quilt top. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I hope you will click the like button and subscribe if you haven't so far, and I will hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links, and to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.